Mrs. Andersen, thank you for joining us on Leaders Talk. Well, let's start with this unusual summer, which is marked by sweltering heat, exceptional rains, flooding, wildfires across the world. So truly a summer of extremes. And you have previously said that climate change is bigger than anything the planet Earth or human occupants have ever experienced. So what are some of the major lessons do you think we can draw from those events? And more importantly, how should we act on it?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't panic. We should get focused. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen here in China, that there is no panic, but there is a focus. Because what we need to do is to understand what's causing these events. And I think science tells us very clearly from the IPCC, this intergovernmental panel of scientists that have been working for over 30 years, telling us that, look, the more gases, CO2, methane, etc., that we're putting into the atmosphere from our human activity, the hotter it's going to get, because these gases get trapped. And so the sun rays that hit the Earth get trapped inside the protective layer that protects our planet. So we want to ensure that we reduce those gases. And so that's why renewable energy is so important. That's why electric vehicles are so important. That's why smart buildings are so important. And that's what we're seeing here in China, but also across the world. What's interesting and impressive about this country, for example, is that right now 52% of energy is renewable. How about that?
This is leading the world on that front,
It really is. At home and abroad through sales of renewable infrastructure. So there is a real opportunity.
On December 12, 2015, the landmark Paris Agreement was finally brought into existence at the UN Climate Change Conference after strenuous negotiations. Ban Ki-moon, who was the UN Secretary General at that time, commended China for making a historic and significant contribution in accelerating the adoption of the agreement. On the eve of the G20 Hangzhou Summit in September 2016, President Xi Jinping personally handed over China's instrument of ratification for the Paris Agreement to Ban Ki-moon. According to the Paris Agreement, all parties are committed to capping the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. However, there are differences among countries on how to achieve this goal. The main difficulty lies in coordinating the core concerns of countries at different stages of development. Research has shown that developed countries are responsible for about 90% of excess carbon emissions worldwide. The international community widely holds the view that developed countries bear historical, legal, and moral responsibilities for global warming. At the 2009 UN Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen, developed countries collectively promised that starting from 2020, they would contribute $100 billion annually to support developing countries in coping with climate change. However, this commitment has not yet been fulfilled. The 2023 UN Climate Change Conference is set to take place in December in Dubai, with the annual commitment of $100 billion in climate fund becoming one of the focal points for all parties.
Not long ago, on August the 15th, China celebrated its very first Ecology Day, in which Chinese president has emphasized the vital importance of ecological conservation for the sustainable development for the Chinese nation. So how do you see this new grand drive and also China's path towards modernization, which also features the harmony between humanity and nature?
Well, I'm very happy to see that, and I love the poetry of it. You know, the green mountains, the lucid waters
right.
are silver and gold. I think that those kind of languages and those kind of words and phrases also sort of echo with people who may not understand 1.5 GHG, all the technical language. I'm really happy about that Ecological Day and very pleased to see that, because it shines a light for the entire nation on this issue and on the issue of ecological civilization, which is a Chinese way of saying sustainable living, a Chinese way of saying let's protect planet Earth, a Chinese way of saying let's develop and conquer poverty, but let's at the same time do that without destroying the world. In the world as a whole, there has been this sense that we pollute our way to wealth, right? The way we conquer poverty for hundreds of years in all countries has been, through a lot of pollution, and then when we're rich enough, we clean it all up. I think there's now a realization that that's not an option anymore. And the ecological day and the kind of language and principles that have come out around that very much echo this realization that there is a better way. We live in harmony with nature. We ensure that we live in a pollution-free world.
China has also pledged to peak its carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. So what's your take on China's green development path as well as contribution in the global environmental and climate governance?
Well, look, China's voice is really important. China's action at home is really important. China's action abroad in this matter is very important. I've referenced renewable energy. It's remarkable that China has made these commitments and is exceeding the commitments on renewable already now. They have bypassed the commitment they made on what they would reach by 2025 in terms of renewable. On the governance side, I would say that China has engaged in the climate talks throughout as a leading economy and as a large emitter that takes its responsibility. The lead negotiator, minister and special envoy, Hua, his personal engagement is something that we need to celebrate. Obviously, he does that under the guidance of the president. Really a significant lift. We need to see the world come together. Look, the G20 economies are responsible for 80% of carbon emissions, and they control 84% of the world economy. So it's critical that these 20 economies make strong and ambitious commitments. Some have a very long carbon trail and others have a shorter carbon trail. Mm-hmm. That's the reality, the differentiated pathways. Now, there's a climate pledge that was made in Copenhagen on finance, and it was supposed to be by 2020 we shall have 100 billion per year of climate finance. We're nearly there. It's like we're nearly at the waterline. And so I expect that by this COP we will hit the 100 billion mark 3 years late.
Actually, the main purpose of a China trip this time is attending the annual general meeting of the China Council for International Cooperation on Climate and Development. So tell us a little bit more about the key messages that you are trying to deliver here.
Well, first of all, I think I have to say that this is quite an extraordinary forum that China has established well over 30 years ago, a little bit over 30 years ago, to bring in and have a conversation with global partners on policy options. And I said in my speech at the closing that it demonstrates both a self-confidence and a degree of humility when a country is willing to open up its doors and say, come on in and tell us what you think we should do. That is extraordinary. I know of no other country that does that. Mm-hmm. So we are here. China is opening policies and saying, what do you think? Give us your best advice.
This is actually very precious, especially at the current stage of the world.
It's
right?
extraordinary. It's extraordinary because there are centrifugal forces at play in the geopolitical space, which we know. But this fact is something that where we are not seeing the centrifugal forces these last 2 days. We saw bridges, we saw trust, we saw confidence. Mm-hmm. So that's extraordinary. Now, my messages have been around some of the issues we touched on just now. Bravo to China for all this renewable energy at home as well as abroad. Can we go faster? Can we learn from China as a global community? So that's sort of on the energy side. Bravo to China for all the electric mobility that we are seeing. That's wonderful. As we do that, can we think about the discarded electric batteries and so on? Because we need cobalt and lithium and copper and all these platinum, precious metals. Can we think about circularity with the discarded e-vehicles? Get those policies in place before we discard, if you understand what I mean, so that we can already now mine the discarded instead of mining for new mines. Right. So I think being very conscious around critical minerals. The third point is, look, China has been a leader in biodiversity, and we'll get into that in greater detail, but can we, now that we have an agreement, how can we do to expedite its implementation? So I think these kind of topics are critical.
And just now you talked about this, you were very impressed about the openness that the country hold for not only actually environmental protection, but also many other international issues. And as a matter of fact, as the chief of UNEP, you have repeatedly emphasized the need for multilateralism in tackling, the natural crisis and also climate change. So are you concerned about the rising tide of unilateralism as well as this anti-globalization sentiment?
Yes, I am. My boss, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, speaks consistently about we cannot afford to let geopolitics sort of throw a spanner in the works and have this fall apart. This is too important. You led out in saying that I have said that climate is the issue. The Secretary General of the United Nations says this is our existential moment. This is an existential crisis. There are geopolitical factors that cause a degree of unilateralism that is not helpful. And therefore I'm quite hopeful with some of the language that I've been hearing while I've been here, as well as in other countries, that there is an understanding that wherever else we have trouble, and there are other places outside my scope of environmental matters, nevertheless, in spite of this, let's find a pathway forward on climate. And I'm optimistic, because it's my job to be optimistic, that at COP28 we will see a degree of forward movement, because we must. In Canada, some of the wettest areas are burning.
With wildfires, right?
The wildfires, which are crazy, that from Canada to New York City they had to inhale and are inhaling this kind of smoke. And every country, especially the global south, are being hit by this crisis. So the crisis is not going to wait. Climate change is here now.
Well, speaking of this collective action and international cooperation, from your environmental point of view, how do you understand the significance of the concept of a community of shared future for mankind as proposed by Chinese president?
Well, we are. I mean, the shared future is a given. No country is an island. The food that I eat was raised on other farms in other countries. The air that I breathe out, my neighbor will breathe in, and the wave that leaves your shore will come to mine. The truth is that we are connected. So the statement that you quoted is absolutely correct. We cannot live unilaterally because we are on this one planet. And so understanding, therefore, that when we have trouble, multilateralism is the only way forward. There are no walls behind which we can barricade ourselves against climate change. There are no walls with which we can build so that sea level rise will disappear. And that is why, of course, the United Nations and the Secretary General is pushing so very hard on this topic, because he understands, like many other leaders, of course, the imperative of action, and that delay is essentially collective suicide.
Well, talking about this interconnected correlation with one and another, how concerned are you about Japan's nuclear contaminated water release?
Well, of course, it is another agency of the United Nations that handles that matter. That's the IAEA out of Vienna. But of course, from a broader perspective, I want to say that this is something that we are looking at from afar. We're not inside this work, because we do not have the competencies on nuclear and fissile issues. That's simply not what UNEP does.
But this is also, still, this is an issue that is relevant with pollution.
Indeed, but that dimension is handled by the agency that has that competence. However, I'm also aware that the United Nations has recently agreed at the General Assembly on this human right to a healthy and clean environment. And so I'm sure that there will be continued conversations in a number of fora on this matter. And we certainly will continue to watch and follow it very carefully.
On December 19, 2022 in Montreal, Canada, at 3 a.m. local time, the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity entered its final stage of deliberation over the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This framework is hailed as the Paris Agreement in the field of biodiversity governance, therefore bearing milestone significance. Until the final moments, the negotiations remained intense, with some countries leaving the negotiating table at one point. As the chair of this conference, China has been working tirelessly for 4 years to advance the negotiations on the GBF. In terms of setting goals for global biodiversity governance, how to ensure that the ambitious goals of governance don't become empty promises, but translate into practical actions, how to mitigate the trust deficit created due to some developed countries failing to fulfill their financial commitments to the Global South, with some developing countries being wary that the international verification mechanisms might become a tool for political finger-pointing. How can global governance be implemented fairly and impartially? In response, China urgently convened a meeting of the heads of delegations to clear up misunderstandings among different parties. After prolonged and strenuous negotiations, the GBF was finally adopted. As a witness to this process, Ms. Andersen was deeply impressed by the leading role played by China.
The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or GBF, was adopted last year ahead of schedule. We all know that the journey to reach this major global consensus is by no means an easy task. It was an arduous journey. You have a much better understanding than me about this. How do you see the role of China as the chair of COP15 in helping to close the gaps of diverse parties who, of course, have different and even conflicting interests?
We agreed on the Kunming Declaration, which set out the basic principles of what it is we want to achieve. That was very helpful because now we kind of had the pathway of where we wanted to go. Then we had to negotiate, and with the tireless effort of our Chinese and in extraordinarily hard work by our Chinese friends, we got a long way, so that by the time we arrived in Montreal, we kind of knew where all the parties were, and we could see that we would arrive at a degree of consensus. But we spent till 4 a.m. in the morning on the last few nights in negotiations. And so it was through real determination, smart diplomacy, and extraordinarily amount of hard work. The Chinese team, there were like 200 people supporting this endeavor, and we could only have delivered it because of that large effort.
A UN report has shown that nearly 1 million species of animals and plants are becoming extinct within decades. So tell us a little bit more about the urgency of reversing biodiversity loss as well as the significance of this framework.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. So we have around 8 million species on this planet, just 8 million. And we are, of course, humans are one of those 8 million. And you're right, we are set to lose around 1 million if we don't take action. And then people will say, well, what does it matter? One fly, one orchid, one butterfly, one ant, why should I care? But nature is this amazing system where everything is interconnected. This didn't happen by sort of suddenly. This has evolved over millions of years. And so if you lose one species or another, the whole system gets out of whack. And so let's just think about how is it that our crops and our fruits are pollinated? Mm-hmm. It's the birds and the bees doing their business. Mm-hmm. And so we cannot afford to lose that type of nature, because if we do, then all of a sudden we will not be able to have effective agriculture and food systems. And let's consider how our rains come about. Well, it's obviously the trees essentially breathing out through photosynthesis that allows for the humidity, etc., to go into the clouds and come back to us as rainfall. So the moment we denude our landscapes, well, then of course rain will be interrupted. So the interconnectedness of nature is something that we need to understand. We landed this new agreement, an ambitious agreement that says we, the collective world, have agreed now to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. We're going to protect 30% of our land mass.
That's the 30 by 30 goal, which is a landmark consensus reached under this framework.
We're going to protect 30% of our land and waters. We're going to restore another 30% that is degraded. We're going to deliver 30 billion by 2030. We're going to halve toxicity into the environment through effluents. We're going to halve the kind of fertilizer runoff and nutrients into the environment. We're going to deal with invasive species. And we made this agreement, which is remarkable under Chinese leadership.
Well, plastic pollution is also a major focus of your work, and that is why you have described the UN resolution on ending plastic pollution as the most significant multilateral environment deal since the 2015 Paris Agreement. Why this issue is so dear to your heart, and also how do you think this goal can be achieved while ensuring the economic and social development not being sacrificed too much?
So let's think about this precious material, plastic, which is an incredibly useful material, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-plastic, I'm anti-plastic in the environment, right? Let's think about it. We go to the store, at least in the West, and you get a plastic bag to carry your 5 tomatoes. You go home, you put them away, and that plastic bag is trash. That's madness. That's madness. That this precious material, we took it out of the belly of the earth, we used it for 5 minutes, and we throw it away. So we need to rethink our interaction with that material. We need to exit the single-use plastic that we can have other materials to be used to package and so on. You know, discarded cotton stuff, coffee husks, cocoa, peanut shells, all of these things that are discarded because of food production, let's put that into making packaging. And then the plastic that we do need in medical and in pharmaceutical and so on, let's make sure that that is circular. China banned in 2018 import of plastic waste, which was a wonderful decision. And I think that China's amazing innovation and imagination and creativity can help the world find all the solutions. So let's innovate our way out of a lot of this pollution.
I know, Mrs. Andersen, you've been here in China many, many times, as you said. So I'm really curious to know, is there some interesting or some really impressive examples in terms of environmental protection or ecological civilization that really impressed you, which you think might be helpful for some other countries?
Oh, where do I start?
No,
I'll be very brief because there's so much to say. Right. But I mean, I've talked about, of course, what's happening in terms of the energy shifts and so on. But if we talk about the ecological side of things, you know, right now, China has this policy called redlining, where they identify where we can do what. And what are we going to protect and what is going to be agriculture, etc. This is a very interesting and very remarkable policy. But China is also, especially in the north, moved in on this massive land restoration program, restoring millions and millions of hectares. In fact, the Sanshui restoration, we recognized under the UN Decade of Restoration as one of the 10 flagships of remarkable nature. This is not just new. I mean, when I was younger, it's in the 90s, we were working in the lowest plateau also on this incredible restoration. So that kind of work is very, very remarkable and noteworthy. Right now, under, again, the president's leadership, there is an expansion of the national parks and protected areas in this country, which is again very remarkable.
Well, as a veteran environmentalist, is there a particular personal habit or daily routine that you hold which you think are noteworthy and interesting to share with our viewers, which might be helpful in environmental protection, you think?
When I'm at home, I go everywhere by bicycle because it's good for my health. It's really lovely. And well, I'm propelling myself forward without any petrol involved. But I think that there are many things. What I did in Kenya was I installed solar panels. It will be my gift to Kenya when I leave, because I can't take the solar panels with me. So I bought, I think, they were actually Chinese, 35 solar panels that I installed on my house. I am completely energy independent. So I think the more we can think about our individual habits, you know, the food we buy should end up in our bellies, not in the garbage, right? All of it. So food waste, which is a big issue here, that the government has made a really firm
Very strict
campaign on, which I just love.
Well, Mrs. Andersen, you've been working in international organizations dealing with climate change for about 3 decades.
Yes.
So is there any particular experience or stories that you think have really influenced your career path and this understanding of your mission? Is it your grandma who take you to speak to the plants in the morning while you were a kid? Or is it your experience of teaching and doing humanitarian work in Sudan in your 20s, or is this something else?
I think you have studied my life very well.
I have done my homework.
But my grandma was born north of the polar circle in Norway. She was Norwegian. So when you're born in such harsh area, very cold, very harsh, you know, trees don't get taller than this because it's very, very cold. You get to appreciate nature in a whole different way. And I was lucky enough, she only passed away when I was 22, I think. So I was lucky enough to have a long life with her. She taught me a lot. And just to be gentle with the planet, because when you live in these harsh conditions, you have to make sure that you are thrifty and judicious about what you do with what you have. And so I think she was very much a very big influence on me. And she would make me talk to plants.
I know.
She would make me talk to plants so that I could connect. It was something that she did. My mother always go, oh, she's making you talk to plants. But I loved it. But yes, I also spent my youth in Sudan doing humanitarian work, and it's very humbling because when you are in a place where people have nothing, I mean like nothing, the entire world has been pulled away from them. It was during the Great Famine of the late 80s, and people were on the move and completely devastated, and communities uprooted and histories lost, and you know, people having to abandon homesteads where they had lived for forever, and you see that hopelessness caused by desertification and caused by the harsh nature. I think you get a respect for nature, but also a respect for people and communities who live in such extreme conditions and suffer so much, yet are so generous, so kind. The kindness that I saw amongst the very, very poorest, most destitute people is something that made me a richer person in every way in terms of understanding what is important in this world.
Well, Mrs. Andersen, it was a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing us your insightful views on environmental protection as well as ecological conservation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure was mine. Thank you.